This is our 5th annual Children's Literature Symposium. We bring together the community with scholars and teachers to talk about issues related to children's literature. The focus of the symposium today is taking a look at illustration and children's literature. So we're really interested in the visual depictions in children's literature. It's a very important part of the university to promote the intellectual life of the community, and one of the things we need to do is gather together and talk about some of the issues that face us as a community, as a society. And this allows us as a university to take part in that role. Its teachers, professors, scholars, librarians, and the general public are invited to this event today. Well, I think it's important that we heighten an awareness of dialogue in a community and in a society. In a time when we're all talking about racing to the top, it's probably a good idea that universities play a role in slowing us down, taking a look at what we're doing, and making sure that when we get to that top, it's the top we want to be at.
Our signs are symbols and perception, or more accurately, the space between the two. Symbols are the music we hear, the movement we see, gestures we watch, language we hear and see. Perception, as noted by Elliot Eisner, is where our consciousness comes into being. In the space between symbol and perception, or maybe it's the space of symbol and perception, readers appropriate some of this space, and they assign significance to the symbols, whether consciously or unconsciously. Our focus today is illustration, the lines drawn, the color and texture that constitute a story. These compose a symbol to which we assign significance or meaning. We read the symbols. Symbols, as composed, represent ideas for our inspection, our contemplation, our consideration. As Suzanne Langer says in Philosophy in a New Key, symbols are not proxy for their objects, but are vehicles for the conception of objects. The composing and the reading of symbols are influenced by the medium itself. That is, whether of words, sculpture, movement through dance, or the still silent tableau, ideas are expressed and extended in accordance with the medium in use. Gesture is movement. It can be smooth, it can be abrupt, it can stand for something very specific. It taps our non-language ways of understanding. On the other hand, as Suzanne Langer notes, words have a linear, discrete, successive order. They are strung one after another like beads, and these beads are all gathered together into a whole. Using more than one symbol system, for example, moving between illustration and words and back again, is a generative process, which has been studied by Marjorie Siegel. In that way, understanding is mediated, changed through this process of moving back and forth. In addition, symbols are situated. They are contextualized. They position us. Consumers are not consumers, consumers too. Composers are not neutral of intentionality. In speaking of film and mode of address, Elizabeth Ellsworth raises the question, who does this film think you are? Within networks of power relations associated with race, sexuality, gender, class, and so on. She further notes, the process of representation is not a process that reflects reality. Media are not mirrors of the world. They are not windows into the world. Media represent the world. Representation presents its subject again in ways that have been mediated through language, ideology, culture, power, convention, desire. Media producers alter what they present in the process of representing it. We are all media producers, whether in our artistry, in our teaching, or in our scholarly pursuits. In reading stories, be they language-based or illustration, what is often overlooked in our school practices, and yet is more vital to literacy, is the path of reading. Ellsworth says, how did we arrive at this interpretation without knowing it, maybe even without desiring it? How have you, our passages through history, power, desire, and language, on the way to this interpretation, become integral parts of the way we look at the world? How can these paths be traced and examined? In today's symposium, there are answers to this question. We can trace paths of interpretation and examine these paths for their cultural, historical, and personal landmarks. We can do this by learning more of the composing practices of authors and of illustrators, by listening to the paths taken by others as they've analyzed, examined illustrations in children's and young adult literature, and by learning of the effect media has on children's reading. We have a chance today to look at the influence of power, history, desire, and culture that direct the paths we take, either through encouraging particular routes or by obstructing others. We can disrupt and examine our paths of interpretation and consider alternate ways. And so, I welcome you to a day of literacy. To start this day, I want to welcome Mary Grand Prix, who has successfully worked many genres of illustration, from advertising and corporate to editorial and children's books, that was a quote, which says to me that she has developed multiple tools of interpretation, understanding different points of view and how to bring them together. Her children's book illustrations have been characterized as highly personalized, lyrical story interpretation, which says to me, they tell a story. If you haven't had a chance to go look at Mary's website, do. I know we're going to see her work, but each illustration invites, it just pulled me, tugged me, invited me in. Just beautiful. So it's our honor and our privilege to welcome Mary Grand Prix to our Children's Literature Symposium 2011.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome and great introduction. Oops. I think I need to get this a little higher, but is this okay? All right. I think I'll start out just by giving you a little bit of background about myself. I want to talk today about the power of creative thinking, and as teachers and parents and people who care about how our children grow and are exposed to different ways of understanding, I think that I hope it'll be an inspiring presentation, an inspiring day for all of you to hear other presentations too today. A little bit of background on myself. I grew up in Minnesota and started drawing when I was about 5 years old and haven't stopped. My father would sit with me and draw at the table. And he was also a great storyteller. He just had such an imagination. My mother wasn't always really happy about that, but as kids, we could not wait to hear another story that Dad made up about the hawkabird or the chincha-bug or whatever animal he created. And it really, truly, I'm so grateful for my dad. I've actually dedicated quite a few books to him, because that early storytelling in my life, I think, instilled in me this desire to be a storyteller too. And when I started drawing, I wasn't just copying things around me. I think I started out that way. But I was actually putting things together and combining images, and pretty soon there were relationships on the page, and people would ask, well, why is that there? What's happening with this? And it got me thinking, and the whole idea of storytelling, I think, with my dad's inspiration and just drawing in general, got me thinking that I would like to go into children's book illustration. So eventually I went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where I learned what illustration was, and although I was at that point focused on fine arts and design, which, again, I'm glad that I did that, because I think that really helped my illustration and helped me be a good illustrator for a lot of different art directors who didn't want to play designer and appreciated a fine arts approach too. So I went to MCAD, and when I got out of school, I took a summer and redid my whole portfolio. And that was way back in the old days when there was no email, no websites. And so when you took your portfolio out on the road, you literally took it out on the road and walked door to door from art director to art director to try to get some work. And I was waiting on tables for so many years, it's not funny, to just put myself through school and then after school to pay the rent. So eventually I started to get jobs. My first illustration job was illustrating a box of little smoky sausages. And this was an ad job. So it paid well, but it was not what I thought illustration was about. I went from little smoky sausages to bowls of Hormel chili. And I got a few cans of chili, which was great because the rent wasn't happening, and it was tough. It was real tough. I started to think about, okay, I've got to start doing some other kinds of work, and then I started going to magazine publishers in town and thinking that was probably more in line of what I wanted to do. And there's actually some opportunity there for me to illustrate in a storytelling way, which was, little did I know, a way for me to be prepared for the children's book career that I would later be a part of. So, yes, I've done lots of kinds of illustrations, and I guess you pay your dues, and you learn from those, and you take them with you, and you laugh at them later. But, you have to do that. We all know that. So today my talk is about the power of creative thinking. I don't know if many of you saw this article in the New York Times. It was about 3 months ago. And it was shocking to me, but yet I knew it was happening. The article was about how there are fewer and fewer picture books on the shelves in stores. And there are more and more parents pushing their little ones to read chapter books and skip over the picture books. Because I think one woman put it this way, that her son was beyond that. And it made me sad because I think parents feel a lot of pressure to push their kids too quickly. I have a 6-year-old daughter. We went to China 4 years ago and we adopted a beautiful 2-year-old. I start crying. And she's amazing. And having a young child in the house, this beautiful child who just wants to learn and is so engaged, has proven to me time and time again that creativity and letting your children experience that is a really big part of them learning and growing and growing up to be really smart kids. And so that's why I'm so excited to be a part of the symposium today, because we're all about talking about illustration and picture books and what a big important part that is in a child's life. In our life as parents, too. It's just, even if you don't have kids, I mean, it's a great way to experience a story and to learn and to grow. So in light of that article and the state that we're kind of in about, not having as much of the picture books on the shelves and rushing our kids a bit, I have to say the article also mentioned that perhaps that's because there is the trouble in the economy. I hope that's the reason that it's happening. I hope parents aren't really bypassing the picture books. But in any case, I hope that we can get back on track and appreciate the visual as well as the written word. I'd like to start my presentation with a quote from Daniel Pink's book, A Whole New Mind. I'm sure a lot of you have read this book. It's a great book. Moving from the information age to the conceptual age. And in his introduction, he says, excuse me, the last few decades have belonged to a certain kind of person with a certain kind of mind. Computer programmers who could crank code, lawyers who could craft concepts, MBAs who could crunch numbers. But the keys to the kingdom are changing hands. The future belongs to a very different kind of person with a very different kind of mind. Creators and empathizers, pattern recognizers, and meaning makers. These people, artists, inventors, Designers, storytellers, caregivers, consolers, big picture thinkers will now reap society's richest rewards and share its greatest joys. And I believe that's true, and I think that as much trouble as we think the world is in today, and there is a lot of trouble, I think it's a very exciting time to raise a child, to be alive today, and to really make what changes we can in real new creative ways. And it really is time to think in different ways and to think beyond the way things have been done before. So picture books is one way of inspiring our children to do that, I believe. And let's take a look at this. I've put together a presentation that's kind of a picture presentation. I've used some of my illustrations to kind of make my point, so I hope you enjoy the show. We dim the lights. I think if we just get the, oh, okay. Can we just dim them a little bit? Is that okay? Okay, thanks. So what do we mean when we say creative thinking? Well, we mean that we're thinking outside the box. And, oops. And we're seeing the familiar as strange. You have to take a look closely. And we're rediscovering the existing. Well, oftentimes in my illustrations, these three pieces that you saw were pieces I did for myself to promote my work when I was starting out, so that art directors could see that I liked the concept of an image, that I liked to take things and twist it or put a different spin on it, to engage the thinker, to invite them in and make them ask why, what's happening here, what does this mean? One of my favorite quotes is from Albert Einstein: "I have no exceptional talents other than a passionate curiosity." And to me, that is the most exciting thing, to have a passionate curiosity. And I believe we're all born with that. I believe all our kids have that, and I think it's incumbent upon us as teachers and parents, people, to encourage that curiosity to grow and to flourish, because we don't want that to stop, because that's what leads to new discoveries and uncharted waters. This is Julia, shortly after she got to our house from China. She was almost 2, and she had a huge, passionate curiosity. And our studio was attached to our kitchen. It was right off the kitchen at that time. We've since built a new studio because it's ridiculous to think I could actually work down there with, a now 6-year-old. So anyway, we just rolled out the papers, put out the chalks, and let her go at it. And this little girl from China who'd probably never held a piece of chalk before, she came from a good orphanage, but still, she just went nuts with it and just knew exactly what to do. And that's that passionate curiosity. That's that desire and that drive, that natural ability to express. And that, to me, is so exciting. She's 4 here. We still do that today. We do a lot of body tracings, and if you can tell, I'm the one on the left. But we have a lot of fun exploring and just playing. And I think playing is the way kids learn. And picture making is a great way to play. And I think it really keeps them sharp and engaged. It's made a huge difference in her first year in school, I think. When I was just starting school, I went to a Catholic school. I was in Catholic school for the first 7 years of my school life. It was not a real playful time. I actually was sick, physically sick to my stomach almost every day. And so what I did to survive was to take in my surroundings the best way I could, and that was to just kind of hold them in my head and imagine myself in that picture, and to listen to the parables from the pulpit and just really try to get engaged in the stories. And pretty soon, the church, the surroundings, the kind of magical, beautiful setting became a way for me to survive as a kid. We didn't have a lot of picture books at home. I think I remember one. It was Peter Pan. It was great, a great book, and I'm glad we had that. And we didn't go to museums, and my family was a hardworking Midwestern family. I don't think it ever occurred to them to take their kids to a museum. But I still knew that making pictures was a big part of who I was. So I took what I could from my Catholic upbringing and brought it to my own work. When I first started illustrating and creating images for myself to promote myself, I found that it was just kind of a natural thing for me to do, is to create from what I knew. And not that all my images were religious or spiritual, but a lot of them had that kind of feel to them. And the holy cards, that little holy card up in the corner, those stories, those pictures were my first exposure to visual storytelling. And they were pretty powerful for me. I mean, they're pretty powerful images. Some of them were actually kind of scary. But they were magical to me, as magical as Harry Potter will ever be. But for me at that point, they were pretty wonderful. So I then started creating work and keeping with that idea of giving my pieces a little twist, a little surprise, that black feather. And the sculptures, too, there was a lot of statues, and I remember going through the graveyards with my class. We went to all the funerals that happened in the parish. It was just a happy time. And, boy, again, when you're put in a situation when there's just not a lot of joy, I guess, you grab what you can, and you make lemonade from lemons. Not that the Catholic religion is lemons, but for me at that point as a child, I really needed to find something to feel connected to. I was just going to mention here the sculptural quality of some of my pieces, too. I think, whether I knew it or not, started to come from that source. And the stained glass windows, which were huge in that church, they're just, oh my gosh, just so big and just so amazingly beautiful. And I just remember staring up at those windows, so much, in fact, that, I'd get a poke on the head and something from one of the nuns in the back to pay attention. It was hard to not look at those windows because they're just gorgeous. And so I think a lot of that glowing kind of graphic patterns and structuring of shapes came to my work as well. I've been told by a few people that my work looks like it's inspired by stained glass, and I didn't really realize where this all came from until people started to tell me, wow, that looks like, stained glass windows or sculpture. And I really started to look at my work again, and I realized, oh, duh, it came from a real knowledge of that, 7 years of staring at that every day. We'll do it. So after I did a series of pieces to promote my work, I realized I really needed to get out there and start talking to the editorial, the magazine people. And one of the things I was proud about in my work was creating images from everyday topics in a new way and trying to concept work, not just draw the thing, but also concept it and give it a new idea. So discovery consists of seeing what everyone has seen and thinking what nobody has thought. And that's really was my goal as an editorial illustrator, was to show something in a way that nobody had thought of before. So I took my portfolio to a local publisher, McGraw-Hill Publishing. Tina Adamick, a wonderful art director there, really got me started on my storytelling, as it were, kind of illustration. And she hired me to do a series of illustrations for this very kind of clinically, this medical magazine that usually used photographs of very kind of graphic images for health problems or medical issues. This particular piece was for an article about bee stings. They had previously shown this article with this pussy bee sting knee. And Tina wanted to bring a different aspect to the magazine by hiring illustration and showing something in a different way. So it was my job as an illustrator to show bee sting in a different way. So I tried to think about how it felt to be swarmed by bees. Now, some people say, I just found this out last time I did a presentation, that this looks like a rose with bees around it. Do you see the body, though? Do you see the body? That open mouth, the screaming mouth, and the hands and the head? That's really, I never intended it to look like a flower. It just turned out that way. So I'm glad I'm engaging you. See, this is what we're talking about. So this is how it feels to me to be stung by bees. And I think my inspiration was the movie Psycho for this. I would be totally psycho if bees were swarming. So this was just a simple article about bee stings. This was one of Tina's articles about acne and how it would feel to have acne. Instead of the clinical, very graphic kind of in-your-face, no pun intended, photos of acne, I tried to show how it would feel. And I used the apples in the background as kind of a symbol for it. And one of her articles about arthritis and how it feels, which I now know. Eventually, all that illustration, years and years of schlepping the portfolio around and finding ad work, editorial work, design work, having a design firm, led to my first children's book. I had been sending samples to various publishers in New York, which is where most of the big children's book publishers are, and for a couple years got quite a few rejection letters. Even one that said we wouldn't hire someone who does pastels. I'm not sure why, but that was the understanding in their company. Maybe it was reproduction reasons. People were still wrapping artwork on scanners, and that's kind of a delicate medium to do, so that could have been it. But anyway, finally, Random House, Isabel Warren Lynch, had a book called Newman and the Ginger Cat. She had a manuscript that she needed illustrated, and she thought she'd give me a try. So she sent the manuscript to me, and I gave it a read, and I loved it. It had some of my favorite things in there. I loved the location of China. I loved the cat and the woman. The woman started off being a really cranky, nasty woman, but she grew to be a beautiful, understanding neighbor and friend to the people around her in the end. And I like that story of friendship, and that I'm drawn to stories that talk about human nature and show people in a vulnerable place, and then they grow to be strong individuals. And anyway, I connected with the story, and I did a piece on spec, which basically means I did a piece for free just to try and get the book. And she liked the piece, and so I got the book. And it was one of the most, it's really, I think, people can think that Harry Potter was the turning point in my career. And, in some ways, it was certainly the turning point in my popularity, but it was not the turning point in my career. This was the turning point in my career, my first children's book, when I really learned that developing a character was a very personal thing. You draw on the people that you know from your past, the people you know, you create whole worlds. You take a paragraph, a black and white type, and bring life to that by just fleshing it out visually and really giving the viewer more than the words can say, but still staying true to the story. So Newman and the Ginger Cat was truly a great experience for me, and learning how to set up character, environment, and tell a story. This is from a book called Sweep Dreams, and this is just how, I just wanted to show you how a layout page might start out looking, a sketch on tracing paper, and I'll take a piece of the manuscript and just tape it down, and just really work. I go through a lot of tracing paper, sketching characters and resketching and getting them just right until I'm happy with them. This is a finished piece from Sweep Dreams. Again, fleshing out the story and showing the viewer what that veterinarian's office looked like. His broom, the broom that the man fell in love with in the grocery store and took home, got sick. So he had to call the doctor The doctor's office was closed, of course, so he called the vet, and the vet said he would see his broom. It doesn't talk about what the vet looks like or what his office looks like, so that's, to me, as an illustrator, that's up to me to decide what that looks like and how much I'm going to show you. So when we talk about the importance of pictures in books, I think it's interesting to, open up a book with a child and they start pointing at things and saying, Mom, why is that flea, that big flea statue in that picture? Or, we start talking about the whys that maybe the text isn't telling us about. And all of a sudden we're into new conversations and new territory we would have never expected to find. So pictures really open up new conversations for kids. And I think as an illustrator, that's a very exciting part for me, is to create a basis where new conversations can begin. Also, I like to bring the viewer into the picture by using exaggerated perspective. I wanted it to feel like we were down on the floor, almost spying on this man sweeping his broom in the moonlight as his floors gleamed. My husband, Tom Kasmer, and I co-illustrated and co-wrote Henry and Paul and the Round Yellow Ball. And it's a real sweet little book about a boy who wants to be an artist, but he doesn't know what to paint, which is a common problem. I mean, it happens. It's, writer's block gone visual. It's a tough situation, but finally, this boy learns how to be an artist through the help of his dog, who inadvertently shows him through the town beautiful things to paint, because his ball is bouncing all over town, even into the candy shop. But Henry doesn't even notice it until the end, when the ball is lost, and he doesn't know how to help his depressed doggie find his ball, so he creates these lost and found posters of the yellow ball, and that, he realizes, is his first art show, because he's put his posters all over town, and he realizes you can make art anywhere, and he learns to be an artist through the help of his friend, his dog. So even though there are a lot of great experiences making the books, and things seem to be moving along quite well, don't think that I don't make lots of mistakes, because I do. But I also think of mistakes as ways to get to a better place and to learn from. An example of that would be this book, Plum. This is a spread from Plum. This is kind of how I start out when I want to see what a color spread might look like. And this particular poem is called Freak Cat Flea. Plum was a collection of poetry published by Scholastic, written by Tony Mitten. And the poems are real fanciful and kind of whimsical and short and sweet. And so they wanted some really big, juicy pictures to go with them and make it a real rich-looking book. So I wanted to just kind of play with it a little bit before I decided what they'd really look like. So I did this quick sketch for Freak Cat Flea. I don't know if you can read the poem. I guess you can, but I'll read it. It says, "Hello, pussies, come and see. I'm the heftiest ever feline flea. I'm somewhat fat and 6'3", so I pity the cat that catches me." So I thought, well, this is cool. I'm going to send this to David Saylor, the art director, and see if he likes my approach. And if he does, we'll go with this design. Well, David saw the flea, and he thought it was much too scary for kids. And as I started to look at it, I agreed. I thought this was pretty scary. This is not something you want to read at bedtime. So I went back to the drawing board and drew this guy, and made this flea raiding the refrigerator, and he had this kind of transparent body with all kinds of things inside of his body, and I thought that was pretty fun, and sent it to David, and David said, "Oh, yeah, it's better, but it's still pretty scary." I said, "You're kidding me. How can this flea cause me so much stress? This little flea I can't seem to draw correctly." So I went back to my insect books. I looked at this flea, this picture of this flea. I thought, how can I make you not scary? I don't like bugs anyway. And So I went back to the drawing board and I just totally rethought the whole thing, and I thought, well, what is the least scary thing I can think of? And I saw Julia's dress-up box, and there was a tutu hanging out of the box, and I thought, okay, I think this flea needs to be wearing a tutu. So I did the sketch. The flea is wearing a tutu, and the cats are now big circus cats. It's a circus flea. So I kind of took it out of the way I had been thinking about it, tried to think outside the box a little bit, and turn this thing into a whole different kind of scene. Sent it to David, and he loved it. So we went to the final illustration. And it still works. If you read the poem, I'll try and memorize it. Hello, pussies, come and see. I'm the heftiest ever feline flea. I'm somewhat fat and 6'3". I pity the cat that catches me. So it still works, and I think the cats are quite bored by his mouthy attitude. So that was the flea story. Eventually, some of the movie companies were calling, and I got a chance to work on some conceptual art for DreamWorks movie, the Ants movie. And my job was to create environments and scenes from an ant's point of view. And at that time, I happened to be living in Minnesota by the Mississippi River, and I would walk my dog along the river. And this particular day that I accepted this job, I started to think about, wow, okay, I have to start seeing things like an ant. So I started picking up bottle caps and rocks and sticks and all these little things just that we would find on our walks, and took them home and put them under a magnifying glass and studied the details in the rocks. And I'd get down on my belly and look at things really low and just try and really investigate. I really found a new way of looking at things because of this job. So this scene is not a river and a mountain. It's a little stream and an anthill and a puddle. And a dandelion that climbs like a redwood tree might into the sky. With those boulders in the front are tiny little rocks. And so what would happen is that DreamWorks, or Pacific Data Images, who was actually the company that was production company for them, would give this art to their animators. And their animators would use things that I gave them in the art, like the way the light shines through a leaf, or the way something's highlighted on the edge, or the way something disappears into the sky because of a exaggerated perspective, or the way light reflects on water, or the way a puddle looks like a lake. So they would take ideas from my artwork and incorporate them into their animated version of their work. And that's why it would be called conceptual art. And it was a very interesting experience, and taught me to look at things a lot differently and appreciate the little things in nature too. So it was fun. And then, of course, Harry came knocking at the door, and it was a very quiet knock. It was actually a phone call one day. I was busy with lots of other work, children's book and design work, and it was a phone call from David Saylor at Scholastic. I had never worked with him before, and he said he had an interesting story. It was just one book at that time, and would I have time to illustrate it? He had seen Newman and the Ginger Cat, and he liked the way I used color and light, and I thought that was good, and I liked that he liked that because I was liking that too. And so I looked at my schedule, but I was too busy to do the work, so I said, I don't think I can do this. And he said, oh, well, I'm disappointed. Is there any way? I said, I don't think so. So we ended our conversation, and about a half an hour later, David called again. He said, you know, I could wait a little bit for you if you just think you could find a little time. And he was being kind of persistent. So I said, well, okay, send the story, and I'll see if I make a connection with it, well, maybe I'll be able to do the cover for you. So he sent the story, the first book of Harry Potter. We didn't know there would be other books. And I read it, and I really liked it. And I liked that connection I felt with Harry and that vulnerability I had also felt with Chin Min. And I liked the power that this boy had and the connections he made with his friends and, you know, even the tough situation he was in as a boy growing up with his aunt and uncle in this pretty awful situation. And the magic was kind of beside the point for me. I liked that. It was fun. But what I really connected with was the real human part of Harry. So I made room in my schedule for him, and I'm so glad I did. And he's, you know, it's been an amazing ride, and it's opened up a lot of doors for me, and it's also opened up my eyes to how great kids are. I've gotten so many kids coming into my signing lines that talk about how they never read before. But when they started reading Harry Potter, they got interested in reading books in general. And that is so exciting, to be a part of a project that got kids kind of kick-started into reading. Warner Brothers eventually bought all the rights from Scholastic, and I guess actually these pieces I did for Scholastic, these were pieces that never were published because Warner Brothers bought the rights and then Scholastic's hands were tied. It's a big corporate thing behind Harry Potter, and we won't go into that, but I don't own any rights to anything I do for Harry. So, you know, it's like having a child and then letting him go, I guess. Anyway, I did some pieces for a calendar that never got published. These are some of those pieces. I don't know. I guess I've got a couple. Okay, so this is Harry walking down Diagon Alley with Hagrid, who Hagrid is inspired by my St. Bernard dog, Chopper. I love them both. I do. And we know who this is, right? The lady in the picture who lets you through. And really, again, just loving the kind of writing that J.K. Rowling does. She just gives me so much to work with as an illustrator. She's just really rich in her description, a very visual writer. Just a dream for an illustrator to work for. And I didn't talk to her. It's not uncommon for an illustrator to not talk to the author. The publisher is the middleman, and they're the ones that I deal with, and they deal with her kind of separately. And she would approve the sketches or disapprove, but she always approved. She was very easy to work with. And she was, again, just easy to illustrate for because she gives me so much to work for. It's like a kid in a candy shop. I mean, I read a chapter and I don't know where to begin. Like, what do I show? You know, I could illustrate 500 things for this chapter. It's so rich. You know, she just packs it in there. So part of deciding what to show on those chapter heads, this is a sketch for one of those chapter headings, is picking something that intrigues the viewer, the reader, but not giving them too much information. It's just enough to kind of pique their interest. Not that they need it in the Harry Potter books to turn the page. You're turning pages quickly. But the illustrations are there to support that and to kind of bring a little bit of it to life. And also, when I do the covers for the Harry Potter, I try to, I don't know if you've noticed, when you lay out the whole cover and it's a big horizontal scene, I try to incorporate little half glimpses of things into the pieces. I've found that kids and adults really like, as they're reading the story, they like to go back and look at the cover and go, oh, that's where that came from, or oh, that's part of that scene. And just little clues and make it kind of mysterious, but inviting too. So this is Snape and Sirius kind of feuding. And so on these sketches where I'm trying to decide what these characters look like, I draw pretty quickly and pretty loosely and try to bring that expression as immediately as I can to the face and the gesture too. I also did a series of really large drawings that give a lot of information about particular scenes from the Harry Potter books. Warner Brothers asked me to do a bunch of these that they turned into colored pieces, a lot of them with their digital artists. And what they would then do is take these images, take little bits of them and reproduce them and put them on cups or coffee mugs or shirts, whatever, and it became then a product. And, you know, this whole time, there's this kind of tug-of-war between movie and book. And I had to, you know, Warner Brothers and Scholastic, and I had to really make a decision in my mind, which was an easy decision, to be more focused on the book. I mean, Harry Potter just became such a big thing that as an artist, you know, everybody's looking at your work under a microscope, and the movies are out there and the books are there and it's on 60 Minutes and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, oh my gosh, I just want to draw. And so I had to shut things down a lot in my head in order to really do my best work. And it's tough. It's tough when things get to be that popular. And I've learned a lot about just letting things go and letting people have their own excitement about whatever it is they're excited about, but trying to stay true to who you are in yourself. So these scenes that I did were fun. I mean, again, it was almost like conceptual art because I was told to pack as much into a scene as I could. So that meant creating new characters and, you know, the witches and the kids looking at the brooms and keeping Hagrid and Harry true to who they always were, creating a whole environment, layering buildings, just getting in as much as I can in there for their artists to work with and for them to have to turn into things. When I do covers for Harry Potter, I would oftentimes, I had to read the whole book. They would send me the manuscript. Well, first I'd get a phone call, and it was almost always just before Christmas. And they would say, okay, he's coming. And, you know, I would know that he was coming soon. It was always a couple of months. I'd know, I'd hear the buzz. David would call me, and he was really sweet to work with. He'd say, okay, I think he's going to come pretty soon. We'll send you the confidentiality agreement to sign. So I'd get the papers to sign from the lawyers. Can't tell a soul anything's coming. Don't know anything. I don't know who I am. Who are you? I don't know. I had to promise that I had a safe, a literal safe in the house to put the manuscript in, and I did. My husband went out and got a safe at, I think it was Office Depot. This was, I think, when the fourth book was out, and we knew this was like dangerous stuff. And Scholastic asked me to get the safe, and so I got the safe. And we brought it home, and we opened it up. A manuscript came, we put it in there, locked it up, put it under the bed, and just kind of looked at each other. I got to read it. Okay, get it out. Okay. So after, a couple of weeks of opening and closing the safe, the thing broke. And I just put it back under my bed where it always was and didn't tell anybody until now that that's what happened. But it was. I mean, once in a while there'd be a leak of information. The media, the television shows, whatever, would be talking about what will be happening in the next Harry Potter book. And then I'd get a call from an attorney at Scholastic, and they'd ask me if I leaked something, and no, I didn't. I was really good. I mean, my husband, Tom, knew not to ask me anything. His kids, who were over at the house, they didn't care. I mean, it seemed like everybody was more upset than the people immediately around me, and I think people knew that I was just working, and they just left me alone. So anyway, that's how that went. So when I would get the manuscript, I read it carefully. I'd get out my highlighters, my markers, and highlight descriptions of characters, places, because I knew I had to be very accurate. I had to be very true to the writing. This was serious business. And I always consider any book serious as far as representing characters correctly and still being creative with it. I learned that the hard way. I had done a cover for Nickelodeon after the third book was out, and it was the first up-close picture I had done of Harry in color. And I gave him blue eyes, not really remembering that he had green eyes. Well, anyway, the cover came out, and I was off to do a presentation at the school, and a couple of kids in the audience were so upset with me. And they brought up the fact that I had made Harry's eyes blue. And I felt really embarrassed for not paying a bit more attention to the description of the main character. And one of the boys asked me why I did that. So instead of saying I wasn't paying attention and I didn't read it very well, I said that Harry can change his eye color whenever he wants to. And I think he believed me. So that worked. Anyway, I learned from that point on I need to pay attention and I need to get every detail because this is under the spotlight. So the pressure was on. And so in doing the cover roughs, I would try to cover as many bases as I could. And these roughs actually were never used. That was for book 5, The Order of the Phoenix. And this is the book, I don't know if you've read it, I'm guessing most of you have, where Harry was very moody and just kind of coming into his pubescent time and just such a dark story. And he had all these visions in his head, and Voldemort was coming into his head more and more. And it was really a tough book for me to get through, and I had no idea what to show on the cover without being so depressing. So I kind of investigated, and I tried to stretch and really show as much possibility as I can when I'm concepting a cover. Well, these covers were not right, so I went back and I ended up doing Harry. I don't know if you remember, it's the blue cover with the candles, and he's in the circular room, about to enter through a door. And this is a chapter heading that never made it because they thought it was too suggestive. This is Bane carrying Umbridge either to or from the forest. I'm not sure. I think it's into the forest. So you do remember, I wasn't making this up. It actually happened. But I like to show it because I think it's fun to see the behind-the-scenes things that never make it. So in talking about magic, the real magic of discovery lies not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And I think that's really what this is all about today, is that, things, there's really, my art teacher said it once, there's really not any new, really totally new ideas out there. It's just the way you see it, the way you paint it, the way you interpret it. And that's really what it's about. And that's what's about having that passionate curiosity to explore how you take something in and put it back out. And with my daughter, we do a lot of drawing together, and we inspire each other. And so I think pictures are an amazing way to teach a child how to look at life and how to talk about new things. And I can see it in her growth in school, and I'm happy for it. The end. So thank you. I don't know if we have time for questions. Do we have, okay, absolutely, if there's some questions about Harry Potter or any part of anything, I'd be happy to answer. Any questions? Yes?
What other artists have given you some influence, as far as inspiration and so forth?
Right, other artists that have inspired me. I was just thinking about that today. I think we tend to forget about our influences, but John Collier is an illustrator whose work I just fell in love with in art school, and he is C-O-L-I-E-R. He's an amazing illustrator. He doesn't get a lot of coverage, I guess, but he's a great craftsman, and he also sets up a scene as if it's staged. He'll compose characters and environment in a way that just makes you, it gives it a certain tension, and it makes you wonder what's behind that thing or why, or kind of intrigues me to know the story behind the characters. So he is certainly one illustrator. Edward Hopper also did that in his work when he would show people like the night scenes, and or the office workers who would be partially hidden, and you'd want to know more. It's like this kind of where you're almost a voyeur, and you want to know what's going on in that scene, in that story. Also, as a child, you know, having grown up in the Catholic Church, you know, the Renaissance art was big for me. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, of course, and, you know, just those beautiful, rich paintings were, I think, pretty inspirational for me as a child. I used to go through encyclopedias and just copy pictures, and I remember copying the creation, the picture of Da Vinci, Michelangelo's ceiling, and just thinking of the power and the magic of those pieces. And now, of course, I have different inspirational people that I look to, more contemporary and some abstract art. I'm working on some personal work that involves painting and storytelling, but it's not for anyone but for me. It will hopefully be a traveling exhibition, but it's called The Dress Chronicles, and it's painted dresses inspired by the women who wear them, and they're true life stories from amazing women that some of us know, and some women you've never heard of that have wonderful stories to tell, and I use their dresses. I paint a dress that they choose and make that dress tell part of their story. And they're life-size paintings. So I've looked at painters who've inspired me to work that way, and just a variety of work. Yes?
I'm curious how much direction you received about the covers age-wise. Were you given a specific audience to target it? Because, of course, in England they have the copies for adults and copies for children. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that.
Whether it was targeted toward a certain age or I was directed to do the Potter covers. You know, I guess that might have been almost like a passing comment in a conversation I had with the art director. After reading the book, I kind of knew what the age was, and you know, I've been told that my work kind of spans the gap as far as from adult to child, so maybe that's part of why they hired me to do them, because these books really were geared for such a wide age range. And I think, too, I have to say, I think we underestimate the young child's take on things visually, and I think we can up it a little bit, you know. I think we need to expect more from our kids. I love simple artwork, and there's nothing more beautiful and difficult than making art truly simple and pure and graphic. And, you know, you oftentimes see the children's books that are that way for the little tiny kids. And it's great. If it's good, it's wonderful. But I do think when you're talking about character and environment, you can give kids quite a bit, and they know what you're talking about. So. In the Nickelodeon cover, they never did change the blue eyes to the green eyes. And I'm not just working in pastels. I usually don't do pastels at all anymore. I'm working in acrylics and collage and oil paints and all kinds of printmaking. I like to mix it up and stay engaged with new materials. Mm-hmm. Yes?
One of the things that I'm working on right now is the way that illustrations can sort of cause a child to perhaps feel a great deal of identification with a character, or else feel a great deal of distance. I must say that, you know, I've been teaching Harry Potter since the first book, and originally the British editions nothing on the inside. And then when the US ones came out, sort of looking at yours. And I must say that sort of my first take on when I was looking at them back in the 90s was that there was a sort of distancing that sort of happened in the sense that I was thinking if I were a child, I'm not sure that I would necessarily identify with the characters as you drew them, although I thought they were beautifully drawn. They were highly stylized. And I'm interested in that because you think about someone like Garth Williams with the Laura Wilder series, where I think there very much the aim was to have the young child reader very much identify with Laura. Are those things that you think about in terms of your art?
To draw so that a child will connect? I guess I don't, in my mind, I don't have a formula that makes a child connect or not connect. I think it's an individual thing, and I think I could draw something that would be in a totally different style that maybe you'll think a child will connect with more, but then maybe that kid won't connect with it. So I think kids are going to connect or not connect, and I think as they get to know the characters, and not just look at the surface thing for a moment and really get to know the story of the character, that's part of their connection. So, I'm sorry, I guess I don't...
I'm not articulating it well. I think the more stylized something is, you have a very individualized style. For instance, I put you along with someone like Sendak. You look at that, I can see anything that Sendak drew, I know that's it. Your drawings, I look at that, there's just certain, as you said, sculptural details, things like that are very particular or stylized. And it makes me sort of think about that versus a highly realistic but not particularly stylized. Like Bunting is a good example of someone who draws children, like you did, it looks like a photograph essentially. Whereas with your work, there's that sort of sense of style. And one of the things I'm trying to think about, just as a theorist, is what sort of impact that has. So I'm sorry, it's not.
No, that's, no, I wonder. I guess to me it would be an interesting study to see if kids connect with the realistically rendered thing more than the stylized thing. I have to say, just as a mother, I don't see that in my daughter. And I think maybe part of it's what you have around the house, how your kids are brought up and what they're exposed to.
I'm curious too, just because I think publishers do think about these things, even if artists don't always. I'm thinking about the sort of mass appeal of graphic novels where you have very sort of iconic images like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid versus, you know, a graphic novel where there's this very personalized sort of thing. And I'm trying to think about the way that most mainstream graphic novels don't go in that direction. They go in the more iconic. So I'm just sort of thinking about the way that whether or not actual children will respond in that way. I'm interested in what publishers are thinking too.
It's varied. I don't think there's any one answer. I don't think there's one way anybody thinks. I don't know. That's a big subject.
One more question.
Okay, one more question. Yes.
What is your opinion of ebooks these days?
Ebooks? Yeah. I like sitting on the sofa with a book in my lap and turning a page, but, you know, I help make books, so I would think that. I don't like clicking buttons much. I don't know. There's something about feeling the paper and turning a page that just you can't replace, in my opinion, but I can see the benefit, and I know they're a part of the future and part of the present. But you can still have a book on the shelf. Well, thank you all very much. It's been a joy. Enjoy the day.